Hello, I'm Paul Perello, and welcome to the Philly Factor. Well, it's that time of year. It's the time of year for ghosts, witches, goblins, trick-or-treating, folklore, the Jersey Devil. Yeah, the Jersey Devil. Here to talk about the Jersey Devil, as well as his great works, his thrillers, if you will, is Robert Dunbar, author of the supernatural thrillers, The Pines and the Shore, as well as the forthcoming Martyrs and Monsters. Robert Dunbar has also written for scores of publications, including Philadelphia Weekly and Philadelphia City Paper. In addition, his plays, notably the horror comedy Bats, have been produced in regional theaters like the Society Hill Playhouse, and he's penned hundreds of cable television programs, cooking shows, travel shows, home repair shows. He's also been a guest on countless programs, everything from ABC's Scariest Places on Earth and the History Channel's Weird US to NPR's Radio Times. And we're fortunate enough to have with us here on the Philly Factor, Robert Dunbar. And Robert, thanks for being with us.
Well, thank you.
With all that work, where do you find time to write?
That's a very good question. And you're not going to get away with the whole ghost, witches, goblins, and then looking at me business. I mean, this is I'm not that scary. My works are.
We're going to talk about your works and sort of this lore of the Jersey Devil, which was featured in your first book, The Pines, and The Shore is the sequel to The Pines.
Absolutely.
Right? So what is the Jersey Devil?
An old friend at this point, but we're just good friends. He is the oldest oral myth tradition in America. The Jersey dates anything. People talk about Mothman, which is big in the South, and you've got, well, actually in sort of mid-Atlantic, but south of here. Then in the real South, you've got Hookman, and then of course out in the Northwest, you've got Sasquatch.
Sure.
And, the Great Lakes area, you've got the Lake Champlain monster. I'm savvy on all the supernatural, creepy things. But this is older than any of it. This is pre-colonial stuff. It shows up in print originally as early as 1610 in dispatches that were sent back from British surveyors who were working in the New Jersey area. And it's a phenomenon. I mean, people love they love this story. To this day, the Jersey Devil is almost a religion. I mean, you can't challenge the existence of the Jersey Devil if you go into the Pine Barrens and talk to some, Pineys, which is what they're called, because they'll tear you to pieces. They're absolutely, there's a Jersey Devil, and he's related to my friend Joe down the road here, and everywhere you go, you've got somebody who meets. Now, that's not what I write about, of course. I mean, the books are, they're real literature. They're sophisticated novels, and I use the backdrop of the legend of the Jersey Devil and the fact that people believe in it as texture for the stories. Kind of the way Bram Stoker used the belief in vampires as a texture for a great Victorian novel.
But there's got to be something to it that this, 400 years later, we're still talking about the Jersey Devil.
Oh yeah.
So what is the myth, the mystique? I mean, was it where did he come from? I mean, was he there before the settlers came, or did he come over on the Mayflower and just decided, yeah, Jersey would be a good place to settle?
There's a very consistent origin myth. The first version of the story you find dates to about 1735, where you actually have a story of his birth, and it stays consistent from there on. Although the place of his birth changes. It goes from Burlington to Leeds Point to Monmouth County, and usually it's Leeds Point. The most basic version of the story has that this colonial midwife, Mrs. Leeds, she had 12 children. She was pregnant with her 13th, and she didn't want it. Personally, I find that really hard to blame her for, but apparently it made her a little unpopular with her neighbors, and she is said to have cursed it, said let it belong to the devil. Another version of the story is that what she actually said is, it does belong to the devil. It's the devil's child. Now keep in mind, this is exactly when the Salem witch trials are going on. So belief in Satanism and the fact that the devil could appear in human form was pretty well generally accepted. You've got the classic dark and stormy night. The wind is howling, the lightning's flashing, and she's in there in her little hut in the middle of the woods, giving birth to this creature, which is normal at first and then turns into this terrifying creature which flies 3 times around the cabin. I don't know why in all these stories it's always you do everything in 3s, and it goes up the chimney and escapes to the woods, and it's been haunting the woods ever since. Have you been to the Pine Barrens? It's a very eerie environment.
Yeah.
You can really understand why people believe there's something out there. It's very quiet and it's very dark, and it's huge. It's 100,000 acres. I mean, this is a huge area.
And at this time of year, these myths and folklores, they all sort of bubble up to the top because of Halloween. But,
and we love that.
Yeah, absolutely, because it's great for selling books and talking about you know, this thing that we. So what does so if I'm driving through the Pine Barrens and you know, I happen to see on a dark, stormy night somebody walking over on the side of the road. Not that I would stop and pick the person up, but I guess if he's got wings, since he flew around the cabin 3 times.
That would be a bad thing to do.
Yeah, probably would.
If he's got horns, wings, cloven hooves,
just keep driving on.
You know,
is that what he looks like?
Put your flashers on. You know? There are all kinds of versions of what he looks like. He's sometimes described as a combination of local animals. He's part horse, part dog, part wolf. I think it sounds like somebody I dated at one point. There's a very common description of something that it sounds like that you hear every year. People will be citing them, and you'll see all these descriptions in the newspaper. People saw the Jersey Devil. And generally, it sounds like Lon Chaney Jr. in The Wolf Man. It's just he was a little ape-like guy with fangs and fur, and I can't do a lecture in South Jersey anywhere without people coming forward. Sometimes they're a little shy and they don't want to tell you right out in front of everyone, but they wait until afterwards. Everybody has seen it. Everybody has the story.
And they're serious.
Not only are they serious, but even telling me about it afterwards, they're petrified. Petrified. I mean, I had 2 hilarious ladies were just telling me the story in tandem and clutching each other and sobbing in hysterics. They were driving through the Pine Barrens and their car suddenly died, which is a very common factor.
Sure.
It
could happen on the Schuylkill Expressway. Every
horror story, every horror movie I've ever seen, the car dies. But also the very first car that ever tried to drive in the Pine Barrens, an old 2-cylinder job, died for no apparent reason. And at the time, it was attributed to the influence of the Jersey Devil. You gotta love this stuff.
Sure.
But anyway, these ladies were telling me they were driving, the car died, and they got out and decided to walk back to the gas station they had. And I'm like, no, haven't you ever seen The Late Show? That's not what you do. You wait. But they walked to the gas station and it was closed. It was locked up. And they started walking back to the car and they could hear something following them. And while they're telling me, they're hanging on each other and they're getting all upset. And in the underbrush, it would walk when they walked, and it would run when they ran. And they finally got to the car, and just as they got in and then slammed the door, something hit the side of the car hard enough to rock it. And then, of course, the car they said a Hail Mary. And miraculously, the car started up, and they were able to drive to somewhere, to the bar they were going to or whatever. And when they got out of the car, there were claw marks all down the side of the car. And that is a classic detail. I mean, all of the if you go down south and talk to the people who believe in the hook man is the escaped homicidal maniac with the hook.
Right.
Personally, I don't think they should let the escaped homicidal maniacs have hooks. You know, something less offensive.
Right.
You know, a whisk or a feather duster or something. But frequently, when he attacks you and you drive away, when you get to where you're going, you find the whole hook in the side of your car. So these stories are classic, and they're all over the world.
Yeah. So how, with this, everybody seems to have this. First of all, does the Jersey Devil ever take the Walt Whitman or the Ben Franklin or Patco and come into Philadelphia for the nightlife?
He's been in Philly many times.
He has been in Philadelphia.
There was a period in 1909 where he was cited everywhere. Suddenly there was a period of a couple of weeks when Jersey Devil hysteria hit this incredible peak. I mean, he was cited from Canada down, through Virginia. This monster gets around, and the panic was so intense that he was actually threatening the local economy in parts of Jersey. And people were afraid to leave their homes and go to work.
Sure.
The Hanover Iron Works, they sent these state troopers out to round people up from their homes and march them to work. But during that period, he was seen many times in Philadelphia. He was seen in South Philly. He was on 9th Street, and the trolley had to stop. And it was like, this is great. I love all this stuff.
Yeah, this is what you're right about. I mean, this type of folklore, if you will, Does the Jersey Devil first appear in any of your books before the Pines, or is the Pines where you first sort of, not necessarily, you're introducing the audience, some readers, to the Jersey Devil, but is this really the first time he's featured in your book?
Well, there's a slight complexity going on there, because as I say, I use the fact that people believe in the lore. I use the environment of the Pine Barrens, which is very, very atmospheric and spooky. And I use the fact that the local people talk about this stuff and believe in this stuff. But I don't actually use the Jersey Devil as a character. I'm writing a much more complex and more psychological series of horror novels, which are getting like incredible response. I mean, critics are talking about this. This is what kills me. People will say, critics will say, "Oh, it's a superb book. It's a wonderful novel. It's actual, great literature." Novel, like this is a surprise. like Mary Shelley never wrote Frankenstein, or Melville didn't write Moby Dick. And these are not works of great literature. It makes me really angry. Could you tell?
Sure, right. Your second, the follow-up then is The Shore, and the thing that everybody goes to The Shore and they're thinking, well, it's the clean Atlantic Ocean and the sandy beaches, but there's a lot of like ghost stories that also go on down the shore.
Absolutely. Cape May is one big ghost story. And there's nothing in the world quite as spooky as a little resort town in the dead of winter, which is where I take The Shore to.
Sure.
I started in the Pine Barrens has got this seething summer atmosphere when you hear the crickets and the cicadas, and mosquitoes are everywhere. People say they get really creeped out by that atmosphere. But then for the sequel, I couldn't do the same thing again. I wanted something totally different. Sure. I took it to the shore and do it off season, the dead of winter. So this a different kind of isolation. This little town is snowbound, and they're totally cut off from the outside world in a lot of ways. And you've got this very disturbing little plot starts and it pulls in characters from the previous book, and it gets very intense.
Yeah. Did you always know growing up in South Philadelphia that you wanted to write these type of thrillers?
Pretty much. I was always, terrifying my brothers with ghost stories at night. Yeah, pretty much. But I didn't want to write one that you get so tired of stories about vampires in Cleveland and werewolves in Chicago. And I didn't want to base one on European myths. I wanted something that was authentic, indigenously American, and this was made to order.
The name of the books again, the Pines and The Shore, and you also have a new book, that will be coming out.
Martyrs and Monsters. Let's get the title in.
Martyrs and Monsters.
Also from Delirium Books.
And Delirium Books is where they can go and order the books and buy the books. And your website is robertdunbar.com.
It's actually dunbarauthor.com.
Dunbarauthor.com. And you can find more about all of Robert's books. Martyrs and Monsters, sort of, is it a break from this, the Jersey Devil and the ghost stories?
Yes, it is. It's actually a collection of short stories, and the first one takes place in the Pines, and the last one takes place on the shore. But in between it, they're very urban, and they're very sophisticated, and on the kind of literary horror stories that I am hoping. This is my mission. I'm bringing art to horror, or bringing horror to art, something like that.
How do you do that? Because people will say, well, how difficult is it to write a horror book or a thriller? Because you just sit down, at your computer. I'm guessing you got a computer. Some people are probably using the old Selectric
I have
typewriter.
monks in the basement illuminating manuscripts.
Right. Yes. But I mean, people will say, well, you just let your imagination go wild, and you can write anything. But I'm sure that's part of it. But
well, you also need a plot and characters.
Sure.
And you have to learn your craft. I mean, you have to pay your dues. I mean, I meet a lot of kids come to my lectures and want to know, how do you break into writing? Well, what are you reading? If all you're reading is the paperback thrillers that you got at the drugstore, you don't know what writing is. Are you reading Hemingway? Are you reading Faulkner? Are you reading Proust? When you know what great writing is, then you can maybe create some of it.
People will say, well, why thrillers? Why not war novels, or why not self-help books, or why not biographies? it goes back to scaring your brothers down there in the row house in South Philly.
It's an area of literature that has been really neglected here by serious writers. There are very few serious writers who are working. And there are wonderful, brilliant literary authors who are laboring in thrillers and in murder mysteries and even in romance. But in horror, it's pretty much been abandoned to the competent guy who's just grinding out the story with the great plot and the scare, and it's been abandoned to the people who write about the girl who goes up to the attic to check out the the scary noise in the dead of night, and of course she always has the negligee and the candle that you know is going to go out, and that's not literature.
Right.
I mean, I love that stuff too, but whatever happened to Henry James and those wonderful psychological horror stories, and Shirley Jackson and M.R. James and Oliver Onions and Algernon Blackwood, and these were great artists, and they've kind of disappeared, and I felt this was my calling.
Yeah. You mentioned a whole bunch of authors there. Were these authors that influenced you
very
young
much so.
in
Very
your
much
career?
so.
Yeah.
Very much so. And of course, I was influenced by horror movies, but always the ones that had intense literary backgrounds. Things like The Innocents, which is based on Henry James's Turn of the Screw. It's a profound influence. And The Haunting, which of course was based on Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House. So as a kid, we saw these movies, and I knew that there was real artistry there, and I found the books, and I was on fire to create this kind of thing.
Some people will say that the move today with thrillers, both movies and books, is that it's got to be bloody, it's got to be over the top, gory. It's but a thriller.
That's what I'm here to fix.
Right. I was going to say a thriller doesn't have to be like that. A thriller keeps you on the edge of your seat, biting your nails, wanting to turn the next page, but sort of afraid to turn the next page because you don't know what's going to happen. But it's not all blood and guts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to. People who are going to read a horror story want to be scared. I mean, I love to read something that's spooky. You want something that's going to make the hairs on the back of your neck stand up and have you getting up to check the doors in the middle of the night. But at the same time, a real novel has to change you. It has to work the way art works. It has to be about real, complex characters who have goals, and you have to care about their achieving their goals and care about what happens to them, and they have to be transformed, and it has to offer all of the same rewards of any great book. And that's hard work. It's very hard work.
It sure is. Some people will say that it comes natural to them because they could just sit down and at the end of 6 days they have a manuscript. And I'm guessing there's those rare cases that are out there. But it is a lot of hard work because you really have to plot where your characters are, where they're going. You got to sort of figure out everything in between. And the tendency is, it's just like anything, you got to invest in the story. You got to invest in your characters in order to have the payback at the end.
I'm a big believer in method acting. I do method writing. I have to feel what the characters are feeling. I can't just come up with a superficial character. Every character I write is a fragment of myself. I have to find that person inside of me and write about that and write about the reality. Even though it's nonfiction, it has to be true. On a more important, deeper level, it has to be totally honest.
When you sort of try to get into the mind of the characters you're writing about, or even the setting, I mean, some people will wonder, all right, so in the shore, it's set, down at the South Jersey shore, during the winter, do you find a house that is reportedly or allegedly haunted or visited by ghosts, and do you go and camp out there for a week to sort of get the feel or the essence of what this old, decrepit, creepy house is all about?
I've done that sort of thing, and for the shore, we mostly spent winter weekends in wonderful old B&Bs, soaking up the atmosphere and wandering the streets of the little towns, and the snow on the beach is a profoundly strange experience. Especially again for a city kid. But for the Pines, I did exactly what you just described. I went camping, I went canoeing, I found wonderful decrepit old houses. I spent weeks looking for a rather famous place, the old slitting mill at Harrisville, where the mill had collapsed. The small town of workers had died down, but the owner of the mill had continued to live there in the ruins, became a famous recluse, went completely out of his head, and lived in his ruined town until he was very, very old. Well, I had to find that. It took me weeks to find it, and it's like the fall of the House of Usher. After the fall, you know,
Sure.
it's collapsing into the quicksand. There are snakes. Well, I used that in the book. This is perfect. I spent days there, taking notes and making sketches. And
It's amazing what, and not only Jersey, but I'm sure every community, every state, every city has these type of places that most people, especially from Philadelphia, only know South Jersey.
Here we have City Hall.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Which is full of Well, that's another story. That's your next book, maybe. But they get on the 42 freeway, they get on the Atlantic City Expressway, and they're either in Atlantic City or they're down in Cape May. But they don't realize how much territory there really is off the beaten path, and that's what these great books are all about.
People don't know what the pines are. They think it's a strip of trees on the side of the road. They don't have no idea that if you stopped the car and got out, you could walk forever.
Yeah, sure.
The woods are just immense.
Yeah. When you're writing your books, your goal is to sort of entertain the reader. And entertain is a broad word because you really want to thrill them. You want to scare them. You want to evoke.
They have to be invested.
Right.
They have to be totally hooked.
Do you ever scare yourself?
Oh, if I'm not scaring myself, how am I going to scare you?
So you do.
Totally. That's part of that method writing business. I have to. If I'm trying to scare the reader, it has to be something that really gives me the chills. And apparently, I'm doing it pretty well because people are very enthusiastic.
Yeah. What type of advice can you give, especially young people who may, as a result of this show, think, I've always wanted to write that book. I got this idea everybody's got an idea for a great book, and many times there are great ideas, and there are people that just say they have ideas and never really follow through or execute those ideas. But as we said, you got to make the investment to do it right. So for people who are watching right now, and whether they want to follow in your footsteps, Robert, and want to be a thrill writer, you want to write about City Hall, or you want to write about the Pine Barrens. I mean, how do you sort of offer them advice?
It's tough.
Yeah.
Can I just say, don't write because I don't need the competition? Can we make that clear? No, the best advice I can give any writer is read. Read everything. Read the classics. Don't just read the bestsellers. If you're reading, what Oprah's touting, you're not
Sure.
reading literature. Some of it is not bad, but you're not reading the classics. I mean, well, of course, Oprah will once in a while hold up a William Faulkner book, and it's like, read Faulkner, read Hemingway. Find out what writing is all about.
Sure.
Read Henry Roth.
Is there a guide or a resource or now when you make a movie, you could literally go online and buy a program and it tells you how to script your movie. But many people think that when you write a book, you just sit down at the computer and you just go for it. You just start typing away. You could always go back and fine tune it, but is that really?
That is how there's all the great writers have got. They all have logged on with advice on how to do it, and really it all comes down to you sit down at the typewriter and open a vein. If you're not prepared to make the investment, if you're not ready to sit down and most people who say that they want to write, what they really are saying is that they wish they had written something.
Sure.
No one really understands the isolation. The writers have a very tough life. You basically are locked down with yourself and a blank piece of paper, whether it's a blank screen or a keyboard or a legal pad, and I've done all of that.
Sure.
It's you creating, and you don't create from nothing, you create from yourself. It's a lot of soul searching. You're ripping things out of yourself, and then after you've given birth to the raw material, then that's the passion, but then comes the discipline. Then you have to do the craft. Then you have to now you're sculpting, and you have to find the not just a story, but the right story, what it is that you're trying to create.
While you're writing one book, do you sort of get a spark or an idea for the next book or the next book after that? And how do you discipline yourself to sort of like, no, I got to focus on the shore. I can't be worried about, this book because I got to focus on this.
You drop it for 5 minutes and you make furious notes and you put it away and you get back to what you're doing. I've spent so many projects happen simultaneously, and you find you're getting really schizophrenic. You're going from a play to a television show to a newspaper article to a series of essays, and no, if you're going to write a novel, if you're really going to write it, you have to just concentrate on the novel.
Mm-hmm. What about the satisfaction that you get from your readers? Now, you talked about, the lecture in South Jersey where the women came up to you and they sort of like, recount, I mean, that must give you, it must freak you out to a certain degree that these people have this vivid recollection of the Jersey Devil. But on the other hand, it must give you personal satisfaction that people are sort of in tune with your genre of writing and they appreciate your work.
Totally. I love the fact that there are so many fans of horror stories who love my stuff. I love the fact that people get so excited because it's the Jersey Devil and my book scared them and they love the character. But what I'm finding now is that I'm actually reaching a point where I'm finding the kinds of fans that I always knew I was writing for.
Sure.
People are writing to me now and saying things like, why are you writing horror stories? You should be writing, great novels that are being reviewed by the New York Times because you're that good. And it's like, well, yeah, I know I'm that good, but this is what I'm writing, and I'm thrilled that you get it, that you understand these are great books. And I'm finding, people are saying things to me like, oh, you're one of the immortals. I'm like, you saying I'm old? It's like,
Exactly. Yeah. And yet, there's got to be comfort in writing what you know best, if you will. I mean, it's great to maybe break out of this genre and try something else. But is there comfort in staying in this?
I've written murder mysteries and comedy, and which is very similar to horror, except you're going for the other extreme.
Opposite effect, right?
You don't want them to scream. You want them to laugh. Otherwise, it's structured much the same. And I've written science fiction and fantasy, and all of that. The whole range of genres appears in Martyrs and Monsters, which is very soon. But I always come back to horror because I think horror writers have a very important role, especially in today's world. It's comforting to feel that you can be scared and close the book. There's a degree of reassurance in the fact that normalcy is restored at the end.
Mm-hmm. And that good triumphs over evil in the end?
Well, my books are a little more nebulous than that. I think they're a little more morally sophisticated than that, but in a way. Mm-hmm. I mean, isn't it wonderfully comforting to think that the forces of evil could be thwarted with a crucifix or a handful of wolfsbane, or
It is sort of comforting, but that's not necessarily may not be a good read. The fact that I want to be scared and want to at night. When everybody's asleep and you're up reading one of Robert Dunbar's books, there's a reason why you're doing that, because you sort of want to be entertained. You want to be pushed to see what's happening on the next page. All of the books are great. And,
Thank you.
Again, they can find out more at deliriumbooks.com. That's where they can buy the books.
That's my publisher. Well, the books are for sale in many places, but that is my publisher, and they do sell them online.
Okay. And your website again is
dunbarauthor.com.
And they can find out more about you
Absolutely.
and your other books. Well, again, the most recent books, The Pines and the Shore, currently available, and we look forward to seeing Robert's newest book, Martyrs and Monsters, that will be coming out soon. And if you're looking for a good read and a good book, and something that's going to stimulate you intellectually and sort of scare you, without all the blood and guts, but it's a good read.
There's blood and guts too.
Yeah, but not to the extreme. Not to the extreme. But everything in moderation, I guess.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. You want to pick up one of Robert's books. Our guest here on the Philly Factor has been Robert Dunbar, author again of The Pines, the Shore, and the soon-to-be-released Martyrs and Monsters. For the Philly Factor, my name's Paul Pirillo. Thanks so much for being with us.